Police officer pushes black elderly man in a wheelchair down the stairs, but the truth behind this shocking scene will leave you speechless. What would you do if the world you trusted turned its back on you, stripping away your dignity in a moment that should have been filled with humanity? In the bustling, vibrant streets of New York City, where dreams are spun into reality and hope is a commodity traded in the shadows, this question looms large for James Carter, a 74-year-old black man who navigates life from the confines of a wheelchair. On the surface, his life paints a picture of resilience, a testament to the human spirit's ability to endure. But beneath that surface lies a well of vulnerability and dreams that have been chipped away by decades of societal neglect and personal loss. Before we start, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any exciting stories like this one. Comment on which city you're watching from. We want to get to know you and find out how far this story will go. Now get ready, let's get started. James carries with him the weight of his past, memories of a time when he was not just a man, but a father, a husband, and a community leader, a figure who filled rooms with laughter and light. With every push of his wheelchair, he recalls the sonorous echo of his children's laughter and the warmth of his wife's embrace. But time, like a relentless tide, has eroded those shores, leaving him with the stark reality of solitude. He dreams of reconnecting with the world around him, of sharing his stories, but the barriers of age, race, and disability often feel insurmountable. The dreams of a vibrant life and meaningful connections flicker like a distant star, sometimes brightening his day, often dimming under the weight of indifference and prejudice. The city is alive, a cacophony of sounds and colors, yet the very streets that pulse with energy also pulse with division. James rides through neighborhoods where the echoes of his past collide with the stark present, where whispers of prejudice linger on street corners and the specter of violence looms in the shadows of every alleyway. The subway station, a gateway to connection, feels like a labyrinth of obstacles. Each step, each push, is a reminder of his vulnerability in a society that often overlooks the elderly and disabled. The world seems to rush past him, unbothered by his presence, while he clings to the hope of belonging, of being seen. On a fateful day, the tranquility of James's routine is shattered. As he approaches the subway entrance, he finds himself at the center of an unexpected storm. Officer Rick Johnson, a white police officer with a reputation for aggressive policing in the neighborhood, stands at the threshold. In a moment that crystallizes the tension of their respective worlds, Rick shoves James's wheelchair in a display of power that is both shocking and horrifying. The act, caught on camera by a bystander, ignites a firestorm of outrage. Witnesses rally in disbelief and anger, their voices reverberating through social media, demanding justice for the man they see as a victim of systemic prejudice. But as the investigation unfolds, the initial narrative of injustice begins to shift. Secrets hidden beneath the surface start to unravel, revealing a tangled web of circumstances that challenge the very notion of victimhood and villainy. James, who once felt utterly powerless, finds himself at the center of a story that could redefine his life and those around him. The impending conflict is not just about seeking justice for a wrongful act, but about confronting the deeper issues of race, power, and the human experience in a society that often chooses to look the other way. The emotional landscape of James's journey is fraught with complexities. The shock of the incident reverberates through his life, forcing him to confront his own fears and insecurities. Will the world finally recognize his humanity, or will he be relegated to the shadows once more? Each day becomes a battleground of hope and despair as he grapples with the implications of this conflict, not just for himself, but for the community that has watched him endure countless injustices in silence. In this narrative, the question of who truly holds power becomes central. James's vulnerability intertwines with Rick's own struggles, each man a product of his environment, shaped by experiences that have forged their identities. As the investigation progresses and the public's interest intensifies, both men stand at a crossroads. For James, the fight for justice transforms into a quest for dignity, a chance to reclaim his narrative and redefine his dreams. For Rick, the incident becomes a mirror reflecting the biases and failures of a system he serves, forcing him to confront the moral implications of his actions. As the story unfolds, it raises profound questions about the nature of justice and humanity. Will James find the strength to rise above the injustices he has faced, and in doing so, inspire a movement for change? Can Rick, confronted with the consequences of his actions, evolve from enforcer to ally? The streets of New York become a backdrop for a larger conversation about race, identity, and the collective responsibility to challenge the status quo. In the heart of this tumultuous journey lies a call for solidarity and understanding, a plea for the world to recognize the inherent worth of every individual, regardless of their circumstances. James's story becomes a beacon of hope, illuminating the path toward healing and change in a world that often feels fractured. His journey, marked by trials and tribulations, ultimately serves as a reminder that the fight for justice is not just about one man's struggle, but about the collective effort to build a society that embraces diversity, inclusion, and empathy. As the narrative unfolds, it invites us to reflect on our own beliefs and biases, challenging us to examine the ways we contribute to or combat the injustices that permeate our lives. It beckons us to consider how we can be allies in the fight for equality and to recognize that the journey toward understanding is often filled with discomfort, yet it is necessary for growth. In the end, it is through the stories of individuals like James Carter that we find the courage to confront our own vulnerabilities, to dream of a better world, and to stand up against the tides of injustice that threaten to engulf us all. As the uproar surrounding the incident at the subway station begins to swell, James finds himself thrust into the spotlight he never sought. His wheelchair, once merely a vessel for mobility, has transformed into a symbol of vulnerability and resilience, capturing the attention of both activists and media alike. Yet, amidst the whirlwind of support, he grapples with a profound sense of uncertainty. The initial outpouring of solidarity is overshadowed by the reality of his situation, a reality filled with physical and emotional challenges that threaten to unravel the very fabric of his being. At home, James struggles with the memories that flood his mind, memories that now feel heavy with loss. The laughter of his grandchildren, which once filled his modest apartment with warmth, now echoes like a distant dream. He stares out the window at the vibrant life outside, feeling the distance between himself and the world. The walls of his home, once a sanctuary, now feel like a cage, amplifying his feelings of isolation. The incident has awakened old wounds, and the emotional toll is palpable. The fear of being seen as just a victim gnaws at him, overshadowing his desire to reclaim his narrative. As the investigation unfolds, the media frenzy intensifies, turning James into a reluctant figurehead for a cause larger than himself. He begins to receive messages from strangers, some offering support, others filled with vitriol. This dichotomy leaves him reeling, testing his emotional limits in ways he never anticipated. A particularly harsh comment on social media, suggesting he was somehow complicit in his own victimization, sends him spiraling into doubt. Did he somehow invite this confrontation? The thought gnaws at him, forcing him to confront his fears about his worth, his dignity, and the very essence of his identity. In the midst of this turmoil, James finds an unexpected ally in Maria, a young activist who has been following his story closely. Maria, a fiery Latina with a penchant for social justice, approaches him one afternoon, her passion palpable. She sees in James the embodiment of a struggle that transcends individual narratives, a struggle for dignity, respect, and equality. Her enthusiasm and determination rekindle a flicker of hope within him. Yet, their friendship is not without challenges. Maria's bold approach clashes with James's more cautious demeanor, leading to moments of tension. She encourages him to speak out, to use his voice, while he fears that being too vocal might expose him to further scrutiny and hostility. James's reluctance to embrace the spotlight puts a strain on their blossoming friendship. He wonders if he's too old, too weary to take on the mantle of an activist. In moments of vulnerability, he confides in Maria about his fears. His fear of losing control, of being overwhelmed by the very system that has marginalized him for so long. Maria listens patiently, but she is relentless in her belief that James's story can spark change. "This isn't just about you, Mr. Carter," she tells him, her eyes fierce with conviction. "It's about all of us who've been silenced. You have a voice, and it's time to use it." Despite his reservations, James begins to find solace in Maria's unwavering support. They start to form a plan. James will share his story with local community groups, while Maria will help amplify those voices on social media. However, each step forward is met with obstacles. Public speaking terrifies him, and the thought of sharing his experiences with strangers feels like standing naked before a crowd. During one meeting, as he stumbles over his words, the weight of judgment envelops him, reigniting his fears of inadequacy. The room is filled with eager faces, yet all he can feel is the heat of shame rising to his cheeks. Maria, sensing his distress, steps in to reassure him. "You're not alone in this, James. We're all here for you," she says, her voice steady. But even the promise of solidarity cannot quell the storm brewing inside him. Each setback, each moment of doubt, tests not only his resolve, but also the budding friendship with Maria. He fears that his inability to be the strong, outspoken figure she envisions will ultimately drive them apart. James's emotional journey is further complicated by the reactions of his family. His eldest daughter, Keisha, comes to visit after hearing about the incident. While she is fiercely protective of her father, her approach is laced with frustration. "Why are you putting yourself out there, Dad? You could get hurt again," she implores, her voice trembling with worry. James, feeling the weight of her concern, grapples with the tension between wanting to honor the memory of his wife and children and the desire to reclaim his life. "I need to do this, Keisha," he replies, his voice steadier than he feels. "I can't let what happened define me. I want my grandchildren to know their grandfather stood up for what's right." Yet Keisha's words linger, feeding into his internal struggle. The fear of failure looms large, threatening to overshadow the flicker of defiance ignited by Maria's encouragement. Each day, James confronts the chaos of his thoughts, wondering if he is truly capable of being the voice of a movement, or if he is merely an old man clinging to a fleeting dream. As the investigation progresses, tensions rise. Rick, the police officer involved in the incident, becomes a focal point of the community's anger. While James is learning to navigate his way through this tumultuous landscape, Rick too faces the pressure of public scrutiny. The narrative shifts as new evidence emerges, painting a more complex picture of the events leading to the altercation. James watches from afar, feeling a strange sense of empathy for a man he should despise. It's a feeling that unsettles him. How can he reconcile his own pain with the struggles of another, albeit an antagonist in the story? The deeper James delves into the world of activism, the more he realizes the intricacies of humanity, how the lines between right and wrong are often blurred by circumstance and history. He begins to question everything he thought he understood about justice, morality, and the human experience. The emotional landscape of his journey expands, intertwining with the lives of others, challenging him to confront not only his own fears, but the biases that have shaped his perceptions. As days turn into weeks, James begins to find small victories. He learns to navigate the complexities of community organizing, gaining confidence with each meeting, each story shared. The friendships he forges within the activist circle bring a renewed sense of purpose, helping him to piece together a life that once felt permanently fractured. Yet, the specter of doubt still looms, whispering reminders of his vulnerabilities. In a pivotal moment, James is invited to speak at a community rally. Standing before a crowd of supporters, he feels the weight of expectations pressing down on him. The microphone feels foreign in his hand, a tool of power that both excites and terrifies him. He looks out at the sea of faces, some familiar, others strangers, and for the first time, he sees not just a crowd, but a collective yearning for change. As he begins to speak, his voice trembles, but the words flow like a river breaking free from icy constraints. He shares his story, his fears, and his hopes, allowing the emotions he has bottled up for so long to spill into the open. In this moment, James discovers that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a source of strength. He sees the connection between his experiences and those of others in the crowd, a shared struggle against systemic oppression, a collective fight for dignity. The applause that follows is not just for him, it's a recognition of the shared humanity that binds them all. But as the rally wraps up, a new challenge emerges. A counter-protest forms, with groups opposing the narrative James has come to represent. The images of hostility and division flash across news screens, igniting fear and anger. James returns to his apartment, feeling a mixture of triumph and despair. The progress he has made is now threatened by the very forces he seeks to dismantle. In the quiet of his home, the weight of the world presses down on him. He reflects on Maria's words, on the support of his community, and on the complexities of human connection. The journey ahead is fraught with uncertainty, but he realizes that he is no longer just a passive observer of his life. He is an active participant, forging his own path, and perhaps, just perhaps, he might find the strength to inspire others along the way. As the shadows of doubt linger, James understands that the fight for justice is not a solitary endeavor. It is woven with the threads of shared stories, struggles, and triumphs. In the heart of the storm, he begins to redefine what it means to be seen, not just as a victim, but as a man who has weathered the tides of life and emerged with a renewed sense of purpose. And in that realization, he finds the courage to continue, to stand not just for himself, but for all those who have been silenced. The journey is far from over, but for the first time in a long while, James feels a flicker of hope igniting within him, urging him forward into the unknown. As James settles into this new identity, the momentum of his activism begins to attract the attention of not just supporters, but also detractors. One evening, as he and Maria prepare for another community meeting, a flurry of notifications on his phone alerts him to a series of social media posts targeting him. They are filled with derision and accusations, labeling him as a fraud and a scam artist who seeks to exploit his misfortune for personal gain. James feels the familiar weight of despair settle into his chest, anchoring him in a sea of doubt. Maria, noticing his sudden silence, glances over his shoulder and reads the comments. Her expression shifts from concern to fierce anger. "These people don't know you, James. Don't let them get to you," she urges, trying to rally his spirits. But the words feel hollow to him, echoing in a hollow chamber of self-doubt. Deep down, he worries that perhaps they are right. Perhaps he is just a victim, trying to capitalize on his pain. In the days that follow, James's resolve starts to wane. The emotional toll becomes more pronounced. His sleep is restless, haunted by nightmares of the incident and the voices of dissent echoing in his mind. The physical manifestations of his stress are evident. He forgets to eat, and his body feels heavier, as if the wheelchair has become a weight he can no longer bear. Every push forward feels laborious, not just in a physical sense, but in the way his spirit drags behind him. Maria, sensing the change in him, approaches with a renewed determination. "You need to talk about this, James. No one can take your voice from you unless you let them," she insists. But each time he opens his mouth to respond, the words get stuck, tangled in the web of fear and insecurity that has taken root in his mind. He feels the walls of his home closing in on him again, transforming his sanctuary into a prison of his own making. The situation becomes more precarious when a local news outlet airs a segment featuring the ongoing protests and the voices of opposition. Among the crowd of protesters, James sees images of people holding signs with his name scrawled across them, some in support, others in condemnation. The juxtaposition of support and hostility makes him feel like a pawn in a game he never wanted to play, his identity reduced to a symbol that people on both sides of the debate can manipulate for their purposes. Through a series of community meetings, tensions escalate. A faction within the activist group begins to question James's role. They argue that his hesitance to fully embrace the spotlight is a liability, sowing discord and creating a rift between those who want immediate action and those who wish to take a more measured approach. James overhears whispers about how he's not committed enough to the movement, and each murmur feels like another dagger to his already fragile self-esteem. Keisha's visits become more frequent as she tries to support her father, but she struggles with her own fears. "Dad, I'm worried about you getting dragged into this mess. You don't need to be the face of anything. You just need to heal," she pleads. The concern in her eyes is palpable, yet James feels suffocated by it. He wants to honor her feelings, but also yearns to prove that he can stand tall, even if it feels like he's crumbling inside. The pressure mounts when Maria, frustrated by the internal divisions, confronts James about his hesitance. "You have the chance to make a real change here, but you're letting fear dictate your actions. What will it take for you to believe in yourself?" The passion in her voice is both inspiring and overwhelming, pushing him further into his shell. The friendship that once felt like a lifeline now teeters on the brink of collapse, as James struggles to meet the expectations set before him. The climax of their conflict comes during a particularly heated meeting, when James, overwhelmed by the barrage of opinions and criticisms, finally erupts. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not cut out for this." The words tumble from his lips, raw and unfiltered. Silence blankets the room, and Maria's eyes widen in shock. The release of pent-up frustration leaves him feeling both liberated and terrified. After the meeting, James retreats to his apartment, the walls closing in once more. He feels as if he's failed not only himself, but also those who have rallied behind him. The flicker of hope that had ignited within him now feels extinguished. Alone in the dim light of his living room, he reflects on the path that has led him here, wondering if he has the strength to confront the very fears that threaten to consume him. Days pass, and the emotional fallout from the confrontation lingers. He begins to question everything, his worth, his motivations, and the very meaning of his journey. The weight of his insecurities, compounded by the external pressures, pushes him to the edge of despair. Maria, sensing the distance growing between them, reaches out. "I believe in you, James. You've faced more than anyone should, and yet you're still here. That says something," she insists. Yet her words barely scratch the surface of the turmoil within him. As the community rallies around the cause, an unexpected twist arises when a local politician, eager to capitalize on the momentum of the protests, reaches out to James for a photo opportunity. The offer is tempting, but it feels disingenuous to him. He's torn between the desire for visibility and the fear of being used as a mere prop in a political game. After much deliberation, he decides to decline the invitation, wanting to ensure his voice remains authentic and untainted by political maneuvering. However, this decision backfires. The media catches wind of his refusal, framing it as a sign of weakness. James Carter shuns the spotlight, the headlines scream, painting him as a coward unwilling to stand for the movement. The backlash is swift, and once again he finds himself drowning in a sea of criticism. The very community he sought to uplift now feels like a crowd ready to turn against him. With emotions running high, James finds himself at a crossroads. The pressure to conform to the expectations of others weighs heavily on him, and he begins to question if he is truly capable of leading a movement that feels bigger than himself. It becomes a moment of reckoning, a chance to either retreat into the safety of his solitude or push through the pain and reclaim his narrative. In this tumultuous landscape, the bond between James and Maria starts to fray. They argue more frequently, each misunderstanding deepening the chasm between their intentions. Maria, frustrated by his reluctance, pushes harder, while James, feeling cornered, recoils further. The friendship that had once provided strength now feels like a source of pressure, complicating the very essence of their connection. Yet amidst the chaos, James finds a moment of clarity. He realizes that the fight he has embarked on is not solely about leading others, but also about finding his own voice amidst the clamor. In a moment of quiet reflection, he starts to write down his thoughts, pouring his fears and hopes onto the page. The act becomes cathartic, allowing him to process the whirlwind of emotions that have engulfed him. As he writes, he begins to see the intricacies of the struggle, not just his own, but that of the community surrounding him. The pages fill with stories of resilience, of voices that have been silenced, and of the shared humanity that binds them all. He understands that his journey is not a solitary one. It is woven with the threads of countless others who have faced their own battles. The new challenges become opportunities for growth, and James starts to find ways to engage with the community that feel authentic to him. He decides to organize a series of small gatherings, inviting people to share their own stories of struggle and triumph. The intimate setting allows for vulnerable conversations, fostering connections that transcend the noise of the larger movement. As the gatherings progress, James feels a sense of renewal. He learns to embrace the messiness of activism, accepting that it is not about perfection, but about solidarity. In these moments of shared experience, he begins to understand the true power of community. The emotional weight he had been carrying starts to lift, replaced by a shared sense of purpose. In the midst of this transformation, Maria begins to see the shift within him. Her faith in James is reignited as she witnesses him leading with authenticity. They reconnect, their conversations shifting from conflict to collaboration. They start to strategize together, blending their approaches to activism. The journey is far from over, and challenges still loom on the horizon, but James feels a renewed sense of agency. He begins to understand that the path to change is not linear. It is filled with twists and turns, but it is also rich with opportunities for connection and growth. As he prepares for the next phase of his journey, James stands on the precipice of a turning point, ready to embrace the unknown with a heart full of hope and the strength of community at his back. As James immersed himself in organizing small gatherings, he felt a tentative sense of hope blossoming within him. The conversations were raw and real, each story shared illuminating the shared struggles of the community. Yet, just as he began to believe in the power of these connections, an unexpected event shattered his fragile peace. One evening, during a gathering at the community center, the atmosphere crackled with energy. People were laughing, sharing, and connecting. James felt invigorated as he listened to a young woman recount her experiences with discrimination and resilience. Suddenly, the doors burst open, and a group of counter-protesters stormed in, brandishing signs with slogans that targeted James and his movement. Their shouts pierced the air, drowning out the voices of those who had gathered in solidarity. fraud!" one shouted. "You're just a puppet for the politicians." The chaos erupted as the atmosphere shifted from camaraderie to fear in an instant. James's heart raced, and his breath quickened as he watched the crowd's reaction. Some of the attendees began to retreat, confusion gripping their faces, while others stood their ground, defiantly facing the intruders. This wasn't just a disruption. It was a direct attack on the community he had worked so hard to build. In that moment, a wave of emotions crashed over James. Panic settled into his bones, a tightness in his chest threatening to overwhelm him. He felt the familiar weight of despair as doubt crept back into his mind. Was he truly capable of leading? Was he worth the fight? The voices of dissent echoed louder than ever, drowning out the stories of resilience he had come to cherish. But as chaos erupted, he noticed something profound. A young man who had shared his story earlier stood tall, throwing his body in front of the woman who had just spoken. "You don't get to silence us," he yelled, his voice breaking through the din. The courage radiating from this young man sparked something deep within James. In that instant, he realized that the movement was larger than him, and it was not just about his fears or doubts, it was about the people who believed in the cause. As the confrontation escalated, James felt a shift within himself. The fear that had once paralyzed him began to morph into a fierce determination. He wheeled himself forward, positioning himself beside the young man. "We stand together!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The words were a declaration, a rallying cry that resonated with the crowd. "They can't silence our voices." The turning point had arrived, igniting a fire within James that he had thought extinguished. He could feel the energy of the room shift, a collective resolve rising among the attendees. The confrontation with the counter-protesters became a catalyst for unity rather than division. As people rallied together, the fear that had threatened to consume him transformed into a powerful sense of purpose. In the aftermath of the confrontation, James found himself reflecting deeply on the event. The emotional impact was profound, leaving him both shaken and inspired. He realized that the act of standing up in the face of adversity was not just about him, it was about the collective strength of a community that refused to be silenced. The fear of being labeled a fraud faded as he recognized that authenticity was born from vulnerability and courage. With renewed determination, James began to reshape his approach to activism. The chaos had exposed a critical truth. He didn't have to shoulder the burden of leadership alone. He could empower others to share their stories, creating a tapestry of experiences that would stand resilient against the tides of opposition. The gatherings evolved from mere sharing sessions into a platform for collective action, inspiring others to take up the mantle of advocacy alongside him. The incident also presented new challenges. The backlash from the counter-protesters galvanized both supporters and detractors, intensifying the scrutiny of his leadership. Critics labeled him a provocateur, and the media seized on the drama, framing him as a divisive figure. Yet, this scrutiny only fueled his resolve to redefine what it meant to be a leader in this movement. He understood now that true leadership involved embracing the chaos and navigating through it with authenticity. As James navigated this new landscape, he also began to explore the deeper implications of his journey. He reached out to other activists, seeking to build alliances and foster collaboration. The community began to see him not just as a figurehead, but as a facilitator of dialogue and action. His gatherings became a melting pot of ideas, strategies, and shared dreams, each person contributing to a larger vision of change. Maria, witnessing the transformation in James, felt a renewed sense of hope as well. Their conversations shifted from conflict to collaboration, and she joined him in organizing workshops that focused on empowerment and education. Together, they crafted initiatives that encouraged community members to take charge of their narratives, redefining the movement's goals and strategies. The turning point had not only altered James's perspective, but had also solidified his commitment to the cause. He embraced the complexities of activism, recognizing that it was a journey filled with uncertainties and growth. The emotional turmoil he had once experienced transformed into a deep well of empathy, allowing him to connect with the struggles of others in a profound way. As James continued to navigate the complexities of his newfound role, he felt a sense of anticipation building within him. The challenges ahead were formidable, but the strength of the community behind him provided a foundation of hope. He understood that the road to justice was not a straight path. It was fraught with obstacles, but he was no longer afraid to face them head-on. The implications of this turning point were far-reaching, suggesting that the movement was on the brink of something transformative. James knew that the confrontation with the counter-protesters had ignited a spark, setting in motion a series of events that could lead to real change. With every story shared, every voice amplified, the community was forging a new path forward, one defined by solidarity, resilience, and unwavering belief in a better future. In the days that followed, as James prepared for the next gathering, he felt a sense of clarity and purpose coursing through him. The weight of expectation had shifted. He was no longer just a symbol, but a catalyst for change. As he looked around at the faces of those who had come to stand with him, he realized that together they were capable of creating a movement that transcended fear and doubt. With the community at his back, James was ready to embrace the unknown, armed with the knowledge that true strength lay in unity. The turning point had opened a door to new possibilities, and as he wheeled himself forward, he felt the collective heartbeat of the movement resonating within him, propelling him towards a future that promised hope, justice, and the chance to reclaim their narratives. As the days turned into weeks, the energy of the community began to pulsate with a newfound vigor. James immersed himself in planning the next gathering, a larger event meant to rally support and draw attention to their cause. Yet beneath the surface of this excitement, a current of anxiety coursed through him. The confrontation with the counter-protesters had not only amplified their resolve, but had also attracted increased scrutiny from the media and local authorities. James couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were rising, and the impending gathering felt more like a powder keg waiting to explode. Each night, as he prepared his speech, James grappled with a mix of hope and fear. He found himself reflecting on the young man who had stood up for the woman during the chaos, his face a symbol of courage. He recalled the power of their collective voices, ringing out in defiance against those who sought to silence them. But the fear that had once gripped him began to creep back into his thoughts. What if he failed to inspire them? What if the gathering turned into another confrontation instead of the peaceful assembly they all hoped for? Maria, who had become a vital ally in the movement, sensed his unease. She approached him one evening as they reviewed the plans. "You know, it's okay to feel scared," she said, "but we're not alone in this. We've built something real together, and that matters. Look at how many people are ready to stand with us." Her words struck a chord within him, igniting a flicker of confidence. They spent hours strategizing, discussing the importance of unity and the need to highlight the stories of those who had been silenced for too long. Maria's unwavering belief in their mission served as a balm to his doubts, reminding him of the collective strength they had cultivated. As the gathering day approached, James found himself reaching out to others who had been part of the earlier sessions. He called on the young man who had defended the speaker that night, inviting him to share his story. "Your voice matters," James encouraged him. "It's time for you to take the stage." The young man, initially hesitant, eventually agreed, feeling the weight of responsibility and the power of solidarity. The day of the gathering dawned, and James's heart raced with a mix of anticipation and dread. The community center was filled to capacity, a vibrant tapestry of faces united in purpose. He looked out at the crowd, and for a moment he was overwhelmed by the realization of how far they had come. The diverse backgrounds and experiences gathered in that space created a palpable energy, a force that could not easily be dismissed. But as the event progressed, the atmosphere shifted once more. A group of counter-protesters had gathered outside, their chants echoing through the walls, a reminder of the resistance they faced. James watched as the crowd's energy began to waver, whispers of doubt creeping into their conversations. He felt the familiar tightness in his chest return, the fear of failure clawing at him. Would this gathering be met with hostility? Would they be able to maintain the message of hope amidst the roar of dissent? In that moment of uncertainty, an unexpected ally emerged. An older woman, a respected member of the community, stepped forward. "I've seen many battles in my time," she said, her voice steady and strong, "and I can tell you one thing. The loudest voices are often the most frightened. They want us to back down, to feel small. But we are not small. We are a community, and we stand together." Her words infused James with renewed strength. He realized that this gathering wasn't just about him or even the movement. It was about the legacy they were all creating together. The tension in the room began to shift once again as people started to rally around the idea of resilience. Maria, sensing the moment, began to lead the crowd in a chant of unity, and soon the entire room was echoing with their voices, drowning out the dissent outside. As the gathering progressed, James prepared to take the stage. He took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment. He felt the weight of their stories pressing upon him, each narrative a thread in the larger tapestry they were weaving together. He reflected on the journey that had brought them here, through pain, struggle, and ultimately a shared commitment to change. When it was his turn to speak, James wheeled himself to the front, the faces of his community illuminated by the light of hope. He looked out and saw the young man, the older woman, and Maria standing tall among the crowd. Each of them represented a piece of the journey, a testament to what had been built together. "Today, we gather not just to share our struggles, but to celebrate our strength," he began, his voice strong and unwavering. "We are here to reclaim our stories, to stand against the noise that seeks to divide us. We will not be silenced, and we will not back down." As he spoke, a sense of unity enveloped the room, a palpable energy that surged through the crowd. They were ready for the confrontation that lay ahead, prepared to face whatever challenges the counter-protesters might throw at them. But just as he finished his speech, a sudden commotion arose at the entrance. The doors swung open, and the counter-protesters flooded in, more organized and aggressive than before. James's heart raced, fear gripping him once more, but the community around him stood firm, a wall of solidarity against the tide of dissent. As the voices of both sides clashed, James felt the weight of expectation bearing down on him. This was it. The moment he had been preparing for, filled with all the uncertainty and resolve that had led him here. In that chaotic moment, he caught a glimpse of the young man from earlier, who stood at the forefront, ready to confront the opposition. Their eyes met, and James saw the determination mirrored in the young man's gaze. It was in that exchange that James realized they were not just fighting for their own voices, but for the future they envisioned together. The unexpected alliance of courage and conviction surged through him, fueling his resolve. As the noise escalated, James took a deep breath, grounding himself in the knowledge that they were not alone in this fight. With a fierce determination, he prepared to stand alongside his community, ready to confront whatever lay ahead, fueled by the collective spirit that had risen to meet the challenge. The final confrontation was upon them, and James knew that together they would face it head-on, united in their pursuit of justice and hope.